using their own contractors, not even pretending anymore that they were trading Ukrainians on these systems, but just they said outright that it would be US contractors going to Ukraine with these weapons and then from unknown locations, then firing those long-range missiles into Russia as a way to pressure Russia into peace negotiations. But really what this was is the US toying with the idea of using now an even higher and more potent weapon category directly by themselves, using Ukraine, as has happened over the last 2.5 years, as the excuse to directly attack Russia, right? We know also the HIMARS and so on, they were operated by Americans, the data gathering, the intelligence, the satellite imagery, the guidance system and so on, and even the targeting system and targeting decisions were done in Wiesbaden, Germany by the NATO and US command. Two New York Times articles said so much, and what we are talking about here then is exactly the same thing, just with a higher weapons category. Now, in the media, this was spun, of course, from the pro-Ukrainian side as a way of the United States supporting poor victim Ukraine, but in the blogosphere it has been well understood that this is just the latest version of a really, really dangerous escalation, because the Tomahawk missiles are, of course, capable of carrying nuclear warheads, and this is one of the largest taboos ever, that the superpowers would target each other with nuclear-capable missiles. So overall, this was, of course, a very large escalation. And the way that now the narrative is presented to us by articles like this one in CNN is that Donald Trump somehow decided not to escalate, that Donald Trump decided that it would be one step too far and it would be too dangerous. But I would like to draw your attention to another aspect of this, which I think is the true reason why this decision was taken. It's not that the United States wouldn't want to escalate and the Trump administration is afraid to escalate. I believe, based upon what has happened over the past couple of weeks, and actually the past couple of years, that we have reached a point in which the administration, or at least one part of the administration, had to come to terms with a very new fact, which is that their stockpile and their weapons manufacturing capacities are not unlimited, and that they are now running low. So we have other articles, and I would like to just point to this one here from the New York Times, when Trump was actually thinking about providing missiles, this back and forth that we've gone through over the last 3 weeks, the Tomahawk missile story, which actually is just the latest version, again, of other such stories, right, of escalation over escalation in the Ukraine proxy war, and that what we have seen time and again is that these escalationary steps were taken, be it by especially by the Biden administration, but also Donald Trump has this history of trying to tough talk on one day and then on the other day say, like, no, I want to stop the bloodshed. Now, we will see. I will show you the reasons why I say that it's not the de-escalation factor, but that it is actually a military production factor that informs his decisions. I would just like to show you one of several comments Donald Trump made over the last 1 week, where he cast serious doubt on whether Tomahawks will be provided, and at least for now the decision seems to be a no. And again, by provided, I shouldn't use that jargon. I should say, like, fire Tomahawks into Russia. Trump said no firing of Tomahawks into Russia. And look at this exchange here. This is the visit of Mr. Zelensky at the White House 2-3 days ago, on Friday last week, and the press conference. And just listen to Mr. Trump's framing of the situation, of the predicament the United States is in when it comes to these weapons, to the Tomahawk systems.
What's going to happen if the United States is in a conflict and we need the Tomahawks?
Well, that's the problem. We need Tomahawks, and we need a lot of other things that we've been sending over the last 4 years to Ukraine. We gave We gave them a lot. Now we have a different situation. We send it to the European Union. They pay for it and all that, and they have plenty of money. But it's beyond the money. We need Tomahawks, and we need a lot of other weapons that we're sending to Ukraine. One of the reasons we want to get this war over is exactly that. It's not easy for us to give. You're talking about massive numbers of very powerful weapons. So that's one of the things we'll be talking about. Hopefully they won't need it. Hopefully we'll be able to get the war over with without thinking about Tomahawks.
So you see how Donald Trump keeps flip-flopping from the position of, well, we have all we need, we can win this war, the Ukraine can win this war, and of course he said very famously a couple of weeks ago in this very ironic, almost cynical post that the Ukraine can obviously win and can even win back all of the territories that it lost in 2014, including Crimea. But while we know now that probably this wasn't meant serious, we constantly need to wonder how the United States assesses its own capabilities. And the neocons are notorious for not giving a damn about reality and just assuming unlimited capacity, unlimited capability, and hence pushing for unlimited escalation. But we know that there are other wings inside the US administration, especially the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, Department of War, and the intelligence community, which do as part of their jobs try to keep track of real-world affairs, constraints, and real-world assessments of situations on the ground. And it seems to me that by now Mr. Trump, much more than by a conversation with Mr. Putin on the phone, was actually convinced in the background, hearing this, that, well, we actually got a problem. We got a weapons problem. We have a production problem, and I would like to show you this now. I somehow don't think, I think it's not a coincidence that this turnaround on the Tomahawk story is coming about 10 days after China announces rare earth curbs on basically anyone in the world, but especially on US weapons manufacturers. So I talked about this in another video a week ago, that this is one of the biggest power moves of China so far, in which, just very briefly, they now said that they're going to use what is called the foreign direct product rule for their rare earths, saying that they will require any company that wants to buy rare earth products from them needs to certify that these rare earth products will not be used for weapons manufacturing. That is weapons manufacturing anywhere, but especially, of course, also in the United States. So, and these rare earth minerals are extremely, extremely important. Let me read you from this article here by the CSIS, the think tank, a US think tank that actually summarizes this very well, what that means, just very briefly, so that we're up to speed. Rare earths are crucial for various defense technologies, including F-35 fighter jets, Virginia and Columbia-class submarines, Tomahawk missiles, radar systems, Predator unarmed aerial vehicles, and the Joint Direct Attack Munitions series of smart bombs. The newly announced restrictions represent China's most consequential measures to date targeting the defense sector. Under the new rules, starting on December 1st, 2025, companies with any affiliation to foreign militaries, including those of the United States, will be largely denied export licenses. The Ministry of Commerce also made clear that any requests to use rare earths for military purposes will be automatically rejected. Even before these latest measures, the US defense industrial base faced significant challenges and had limited production capacity and limited ability to rapidly scale to meet rising defense technology needs. The new restrictions will only deepen these vulnerabilities. Now, this is a real problem, and to my mind, is now what is winning out in Washington. The realism is setting in that the capacity of the United States, the sheer weapons manufacturing capacity, might be a problem. And we have two aspects to this, right? On the one hand, we have the stockpile. We have the the weapons that have already been produced and that are just around in case or ready for export. On the other hand, we have the ability to reproduce these weapons, and for the longest time, for the last 50, 60 years, it looked as if the United States, if it decides to produce weapons, it can basically do so at more or less any scale it wants. Just a question of how much time it will take until these weapons are produced. Hence, any kind of war in the world can be fought basically at will. But it now looks as if though this game has seriously changed. And this is the point where I would like to alert you to a wonderful article by a regular guest on this podcast here on neutrality studies, Arnaud Bertrand, the French analyst previously residing in China, now in Southeast Asia. How long can he has a wonderful Substack. Arnaud Bertrand has a great Substack, and I encourage all of you to subscribe to him because he provides really high class information analysis time and time again. He wrote recently this very long piece, How Long Can China Play the Rare Earths Card? And in this article he takes the example of gallium, one of these now restricted rare earths. Although I understand that gallium itself is not on the periodic table, is a little bit different. But anyhow, it's one of these metals that is now is going to be under restriction under export licensing. And the problem with that one, and we need to understand why these rare earths are not only important for US manufacturing, but why it's not easy to suddenly get them from somewhere else than China. Because another article really summarized it very well, because rare earths is kind of a bad naming convention for these metals, because this article here puts it very, very nicely. They would better be named as troublesome earths. The problem is not that you don't have many of them in the crust of the earth. There's plenty of it. But in order to extract them, the extraction process is really, really tough. And Arnaud Bertrand does a wonderful job at showing the what do you call that? The rat's tail, or all of the little steps that this requires in order to extract them. Because on the face of it, you would think that okay, it's a rare earth, right? You find a deposit, a gallium deposit, then you take some backhoe and a couple of drillers. You take out the stones, and then a little bit of heat, and then gallium flows out. Well, turns out that's not how it works, and that's not how it works with most of these troublesome earths. What you have to do, and there's a very pretty paper here that describes this, is that most of these rare earths are actually byproducts of the extraction of other more common metals. And the example of gallium is that in order to produce gallium, you must, at least for large scale production, you must produce aluminium. Gallium is a waste product, or is a side product of aluminium production. So if we follow this little graph here, you do mining, and then with the mining process, once you start to refine these things for so and so much aluminium, you can then take a couple of per mils of gallium out of the process. So Arnaud Bertrand describes this quite well at one point. In order to produce 100 tons of gallium, you just need an immensely large industry of aluminium production to just get to that. And we are not talking about 1 to 100. We are talking about a ratio of 1 to 120,000 in order to extract, gallium to alumina production. And I must say, at this point, I have no way of independently verifying these numbers. I did talk to another colleague who's been on this channel before, Jack Buffington, who says that overall this picture is correct, also when it comes to the supply chain, but the difficulty of extracting this is a little bit overhyped. But nevertheless, whether it is 1 to 120,000, whether it's 1 to 80,000, the fact stands that in order to produce gallium and in order to produce these other rare earths, you need to have a primary metal industry of each one of these metals in order to extract like reasonable quantities of the rare earths. So again, following this little diagram here, what you see is that you can produce gallium. That gallium will then also be stocked up, and some of it will be lost in whatever you produce. And especially when you think about weapons production, there is very little of these missile and weapons systems through which then recycling can happen, and you can gain gallium back. But of course, when we talk about this, we also talk about the applications in phones and in other IT products where there is a chance of getting some gallium back through recycling. But overall, in order to satisfy the demand of the economy and live up to like not just feed your military industrial complex, but your also civilian needs, you need a very, very large production capacity. And Arnaud Bertrand then points out that in order to do that, you have then a whole chain of things that needs to be given. So for instance, you need massive amounts of energy. You need to build 4 or 5 additional nuclear power plants in order just to come up with enough energy in order to do the aluminium extraction. You naturally also need to educate people to work in the aluminium sector. And although the United States has an aluminium industry, it is by far not enough in order to also satisfy then the gallium production. And you would need to ramp that up. You need to build the vocational schools, and you need to build the incentive structures for young college graduates or let's say high school graduates to decide that okay, they want to go into this industry where they can earn a decent salary. So, and what Arnaud points out, these are all things that China has solved. China has a very large industry, has a very large also power production capacity, has built that up, also has built the labor force, has built the know-how, which by the way, for gallium extraction and so on, excuse me, the Chinese also banned that one. They banned the knowledge transfer outside of this rare earth of the rare earth sector. And overall, that's I encourage you to subscribe to Arnaud's Substack. I won't read the entire article to you because it's also paywalled, but it's absolutely worth subscribing to his Substack. You get a lot of very good information. Let me just read the very last paragraph of his the second last paragraph of his article. Look at it through the lens of capital allocation. Building rare earth capacity requires accepting decade-long losses and 20-year payback periods. Extremely patient capital. Patient capital requires investors willing to accept long horizons. Long horizons require regulatory and political stability. Stability requires societal consensus that manufacturing is strategic. Consensus requires... We're back to education, media, and culture. So his argument, in a sense, is that the United States, the way it is running today and the way its entire economy is structured, also how it has been financialized over the past decades and actually outsourced much of its productive capacity to abroad, just is structurally not able to keep up with the demands in order to produce these rare earths at scale. Again, the problem is not the access to the rare earths. The problem is the extraction of it and the processes and the know-how needed in order to get it, and the supply chains. And my Jack Buffington, who was on the channel as well before, says you can create these capacities. It's not quite as complicated and as difficult as Arnaud Bertrand depicted, but it is absolutely true that the United States, ever since 20 years ago, has given up on domestically securing its supply chains, because it took the easier way out. And the easier way out was to just source all of these components, and rare earths are just one of the components, from abroad, and hence not bother with it anymore. And this has now been going on for about 30 years. And reversing that trend is just a mammoth task that would need to be achieved, right? So if this issue is assessed by the people in the Pentagon and so on as a structural impediment, then this would explain even more why the United States is now suddenly getting more careful and more protective of its stockpile. Because again, one thing is the capacity to produce this stuff, the other thing is how much you have. And I said so in my last video, but again, over the last 3 years, the United States has been throwing large parts of its stockpile, has emptied out its warehouses on Russia, using Ukraine as the proxy to do so in order to still look good on the global scene, right? It has also expended many missiles, not Tomahawks, but other systems like HIMARS and that, for Israel against in its 7-8 front war in West Asia. And the United States is looking at more theaters, including, of course, again, a war with Iran and potentially a war with Venezuela. So all of this leads to the logical conclusion that the United States might need to be careful with how much of these things that it spends, which then leaves us with the question, so how many of these missiles do we actually have? What are we talking about? Like, what's the scale of the numbers game? Because I don't have that video right now, but there's this after the Zelensky meeting, there was another press conference, and after the latest talk with Vladimir Putin, there was another press conference, and Donald Trump said jokingly, I was asking Vladimir Putin, do you want me to send these Tomahawks, 1,000 Tomahawks to Ukraine? And oh no, he wasn't very happy with it. And Trump said, 1,000 Tomahawks. Should I send 1,000 Tomahawks to Ukraine? Are these the scales that we're talking about? Well, let's look at it. There's this Reuters article here from October 7th, which says that Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine are unlikely. So this is like, it was this up and down cycle of like, oh, it's going to happen, no, it's not going to happen, no, it's going to happen, no, it's not going to happen. And they interview here an US official, an unnamed official, who stressed that there was no shortage of the workhorse weapon, the Tomahawk workhorse weapon. It's a kind of sick how these people think about these weapons of death and destruction and of slaughter and blood. It's like a workhorse. It's our workhorse. It's absolutely sick. But okay, let's leave that aside. That's not the point. The point is that this article here, toward the latter part, kind of actually, without saying so, says like, well, maybe you were not quite right, Mr. US official, because according to the Pentagon budget documents, the US Navy, the primary user of the Tomahawk, has thus far purchased 8,959 Tomahawk missiles at an average price of $1.3 billion. Okay, shows again how obsessed the US is also with costs and so on, but we can largely put aside. Costs are not the constraint. The US has a sovereign currency. The US can purchase as many of these things as it can. Not as it wants, but as it can. 8,959. Turns out, if you search a little bit, you find out that Tomahawks have been produced since the mid-1980s. I'll show you that in a second, in another article. This is over the last 40 years, basically my lifetime so far, the Navy has procured a total of about 9,000 of these missiles. And again, the Navy is the main user of this, because most of these Tomahawk missiles are fired from ships, as you are seeing here. There are Tomahawk systems that you can put on very large trucks. They're super clunky and super difficult, so there might be operational reasons for the United States to decide not to give these Tomahawks, because maybe the assessment is also that they're too difficult or too dangerous to use on land, because they would be difficult to hide. But so basically, the Navy, we are talking here about 9,000 of these missiles over the last 40 years. That I did a short calculation. 9,000 over 40 years, that's about 230, 240 missiles per year. And look at this. The Tomahawk missile has been introduced since the mid-1980s. Okay, here it is. In recent years, production has ranged from 55 to 90 per year. According to Pentagon budget data, the US plans to buy 57 missiles in 2026. Not 57,000, not 5,700, 57. And the production and the production ranges between 55 to 90. And again, we had 9,000 since the mid-80s. And that would translate to about 240 or so. Probably it was much more in the beginning. Probably we're talking here about 300, 400 per year in the beginning. And then probably this declined. We don't have these numbers because obviously these are sensitive to the US defense system. But I am absolutely certain the Pentagon has these numbers. And I'm absolutely certain if the US president asks how many of the goddamn things do we have, he will actually get the proper numbers. Well, all we can do here is infer from, like, secondary sources. But it seems to me that the production of these things went down quite a bit over the past decade, maybe two. I have one more article from Responsible Statecraft that also corroborates this thesis. That this article here is from almost a year ago, November 11, 2024. Mike Fredenberg, and the Responsible Statecraft is of course a pro-peace think tank in the US. It's one of the few that is like an anti-neocon think tank. So very good people, including Anatol Lieven, for instance, there. So a lot of good people. And this article has some interesting data that I just would like to read out to you. According to a report by the Heritage Foundation, up through 2023, the Pentagon had procured roughly 12,000 Standard Missiles 2S, 400 Standard Missiles 3S, 1,500 Standard Missiles 6S, and 9,000 Tomahawk land attack missiles. During this same period, the US Navy has expended at least 2,800 Standard Missiles and 2,900 Tomahawks. And these figures do not include the previous mentioned expenditures of the last year or so. Shedding more light on roughly what our current reserves of missiles looks like, the Wall Street Journal estimates that when training exercise and the retirement of older weapons are taken into account, only about 4,000, let me repeat this, only about 4,000 Tomahawks remained as of 2020, and since then the US has only produced another 250 or so Tomahawks, because the article is written in 2024, right? And in the 4-year period, about 60 to 70 per year, right? So adds up to roughly 250. So we are talking about 4,250, 4,300. That is the best kind of estimate of the Tomahawk missile stock of the Navy. There might be another stock by some of the other service branches, absolutely possible, but since the Navy has the most of them, even if we double the figure, we land at maximum of 8,000 of these. Our nation's missile stockpile continues to be depleted, says the article. And one more paragraph. Put another way, the entirety of our Navy's warships, not including quad packs of shorter range air defense missiles, can carry about 10,000 missiles in their vertical launch systems that can be used for wide area defense or long range attacks. So as things stand, once we expend the full complement of our missile launched, of our VLS launched missiles, we are roughly 3,000 missiles short of being able to fully replenish our ships. The US now has more capacity of cylinders, of canisters, to put in these Tomahawk missiles and other missile systems than it has actual missiles. And this in conjunction with the announcement by China that they're going to make it damn hard for the United States military-industrial complex to get its hands on these rare earths. Well, this is a serious constraint, and this is not a constraint that you can change within a year or two. Again, you cannot just find a mine, you cannot even find a mine somewhere in Venezuela and then just start taking that stuff out. You can't. It's a different manufacturing process. You need an entire industry around this, and the industry is not an easy one to build. It can be built, it can be done, but we are looking at a time horizon of, in the very fastest, 10 to 20 years, if things go optimally. So And this, in addition, by the way, to this other structural problem, which is that capitalism in the United States worked its way also through the military-industrial complex and has unified what used to be 12 or 14 companies that produced weaponry of the United States, and leaves us by now with only 3 suppliers of this stockpile of weapons: Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing. And that this article here then describes the problem with this, which is that, okay, you now have a lack of innovation, you have a lack of competition, you have kind of the market segmentation, and these companies don't really try very much anymore to produce better and more modern stuff. They just keep producing and try to cut costs. So even within the production cycle and production capacities of the US, you have these structural impediments that now stand in the way of finding a way out, of trying to figure out how to use other metals, although Arnaud Bertrand says that this is it's impossible because you need the physical properties of these rare earths. However, necessity is the mother of innovation, right? So if the push comes to shove, you would try to just to pivot to other maybe defense systems. And we know that currently we've learned a lot through the last couple of wars, as horrible as it is, but we've learned that land war is possible again. We've learned about the importance of drones. We have learned how drones can substitute missile systems. So, if the United States is serious about this, seriously feeling threatened about its weapons manufacturing capacity, what you need to do in this case is to pour massive amounts of money into R&D in order to figure out how to use something else but these systems. But then even there, we are talking here about very, very long time horizons. I mean, drones are not the answer to everything, right? We know that the hard power of the United States rests on some of these, shall we call them, legacy infrastructure, including, of course, the submarines, including, of course, the aircraft carriers and so on. But those are still very important power projection tools, and these tools, even just to repair them and keep them afloat and also build the next generation, then need inputs from these supply chains that we've looked at. Now, there's one more article here that's very much just sings praise on how innovative the U.S. Defense sector is and so on, but it does have a few useful insights. For one, that the annual production capacity of the United States when it comes to HIMARS systems increased from 48 to 96 launchers in 2024. And also when it comes to Javelin anti-tank missiles, the United States used to produce 2,400 missiles per year. Lockheed Martin plans to increase capacity to 3,960. And then the article says how great this is, right? But just look at this. I mean, these numbers are not astronomical. And the increase, okay, next year we're going to produce 50% more. Okay, 50% more is good for any kind of company who produces anything. But if we're talking here about a serious crunch in the weapons stockpile of the United States and the replenishing of that, then we might expect, a tenfold increase that might be needed, not just 50% more. And it seems that this is the current capacity limit, because again, right now you can sell these things, right? So why would you not produce more if you could? It seems that it's not that feasible. You cannot just crank it up. You cannot just build 10 more factories and then put out 10 times more of these weapons, because you don't have the labor, you don't have the energy, you don't have the resources apparently in order to do so. One more passage here. Lockheed Martin says its production surge is about more than meeting current demand. It's about shaping the defense industrial base for future conflicts. The company is investing heavily in automation, advancing manufacturing, and resilient supply chains to ensure rapid scalability and sustained output over the long term. Lockheed Martin is delivering at the speed of relevance, backed by the strength of American manufacturing and a resilient defense industrial base. Whenever people spit out this kind of nonsense, PR nonsense, the speed of relevance, you know that there's a problem in the background. These numbers are not speed of relevance. These numbers are speed of probably supply chain crunch. You have a serious production capacity problem, and you're trying to use pretty words in order to put lipstick on the pig, which is this this fact that now you're in a real pickle, right? You could produce more if you could, but you can't, because there are physical constraints. It's not about the money. It's not about how much money you throw at it. It's about how you get access to these resources, including labor resources, who work on this. So this, to me, then, just to bring it all together, actually also explains the reaction by the Russians, because we've over the last 2 weeks, 2 weeks, we've had a lot of talk about this as well, especially in the blogosphere, that why is Russia not reacting more angrily? Why is Vladimir Putin basically still fine with the prospect of the US firing Tomahawk missiles at it? Why did Mr. Lavrov in a press conference in Russia say that even if the United States delivers Tomahawks to Ukraine, that would not change the overall approach of Russia. It might just decrease the relationship with the United States. Why was this such a muddled response? Well, if they understand this, and if they've talked to the Chinese, which I suppose they did, what we now can tell is that there might be a strategy behind this. There might be a strategy. It's like, okay, you have 4,000 of these things left, maybe 6,000. Okay, come on. Bring it on. Fire them too. You already fired so much at us. We can get rid of those things. We can absorb it. And then you're going to be at an even weaker level. I have nothing to prove this theory, but if this analysis here is even just 50% correct, and if the assessment on the Russian side is the same, that the US is starting to run out of its military capacity, then actually, while it is a very unpleasant prospect that you are going to be fired at, if you're sufficiently sure that you can shoot these things down, that you can absorb the shocks, that your economy will not collapse and crash, that you can deal with the Tomahawks the way you dealt with the HIMARS, which the Russians did very successfully, by the way. There was damage, of course there was, and there were deaths and so on, but it was never on a scale of being threatening to the nation itself, right? So you in a sense call the bluff. You call the bluff of the Americans and say, like, fine, come on, do it. And then you will end up on an even weaker base. And it seems that Donald Trump actually understood, especially when we look at a couple of these statements that he made. He also said similar things in TV interviews with US TV stations, that maybe this is now the wing that won out. Again, the neocons will never admit to this. The neocons will always urge him to keep shoveling anything, to Ukraine, even once the silos are really empty, even once the warehouses have nothing left. They will go to the warehouses and yell at the warehouses where the weapons are, right? They cannot accept reality.